start with a, just a simple grounding exercise. What that means is very open-ended, very flexible. To me, a grounding exercise is just a way to help us kind of become more present and feel like we are reconnecting with, the moment. And the thing is, as I think most people on this call know, it's impossible not to be connected to the moment. That's kind of the paradox, is you hear so many people when they talk about mindfulness and meditation, and even like in, manifesting circles, like, we want to be present in the now. Like I say that all the time. But the paradox or the irony is that we're always present. It's just how we're experiencing the present often feels incredibly, I don't want to say stressed, but also like just like overwhelming. Like it feels like we're not present, even though we always are present. If you know what I mean, if you catch my drift of what I'm trying to convey there. But the good thing and the point of like a grounding exercise is just to realize, well, no, even when all this crazy stuff's happening in my head or I feel uncomfortable, I still am present. I'm present the whole time. I'm present. You're conscious, you're present. And there's different ways of looking at this, and there's semantics and different terms and how we say conscious and unconscious. But in my book, if you're not conscious, you're not there at all. So you got nothing to worry about. And that's something I think that has to be experienced to feel good about that, because it might feel scary otherwise. So anyway, let's ground ourselves in whatever way we want. What I'm doing and what you can do if you want is I'm just looking out the window here and I'm watching the cars. And I've got my feet on the ground, got my hands together. I'm watching, there's two flags blowing in the wind. And I'm just okay with this. It's rush hour where I am, and I can see a lot of cars driving to and fro. And they're just going. The flags are just blowing in the wind. And my mind's just going. My body's just going. These things just seem natural. They just happen. There's a flow to them, a flux to them. And, the nice thing about a grounding exercise is it makes us, I guess you could say, notice this. And maybe more importantly, it makes us okay with it. Okay with it. It's like why we're always saying, like, you're already okay. You're already okay. You're already okay. We can discuss manifesting theories. We can discuss how to get more of what you want practically in your life. But the underlying thrust of it is that this state of flux right now is okay. You're always present in it. And when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel stressed out, it can be very scary. But underneath that, you're still really just consciously present. You're still present. The flags are still blowing, the cars are still going. I don't have to try consciously to make it so the flags blow or the cars go. I don't have to try to consciously make myself breathe or have my feet on the ground. I think with these law of attraction ideas, we get into the idea unintentionally a lot of the time of trying to control things. And this goes against the natural tendency of life, which is that things are beyond our control. And that's why there's kind of obviously in the law of attraction or law of assumption or manifesting space, we're not really trying to control things. We're trying to work with things. And, when Neville talks about using your imagination, for instance, it's to work with your imagination, to work through your imagination. But that's why there's that counterbalance of letting go and just realizing that everything's flowing through you anyway. It's really the same thing when you ground yourself, when you look at it in this way. And it's perfectly okay not to look at it in this way. This is pretty esoteric, what we're talking about right now. But being present is something that's available to us. Even when it seems like we're not capable of doing it, we can still be present because we are, whether we like it or not. So let's just spend a few more moments appreciating this right now. Okay. So welcome if you just joined. And yeah, this is the group session for September, or just for today. I don't know when the next one will be. It might be in a week. It might be in 4 months. I'm not sure. Just kind of do it spontaneously. I have things I could talk about, but I feel like first I'd like to just see if people have questions that they want to ask. And then if they don't right away, I'll talk about stuff. And again, if you've joined late, you can type in the chat, or I'd love to talk to you on audio or video. This is going to be on YouTube, so just be mindful if you want to be kept anonymous to change your name if you're going to be talking to me on audio or anything else. Okay. So yeah, does anybody have any questions before or to start? And welcome everybody. Thank you for people who said hello. See a lot of familiar faces here, which is great. Hey, Kate.
Hey, I was
Hi.
just going to say I appreciate what you said about how we're always present, even when it doesn't seem like it, because sometimes I feel like even this whole thing about being present can be made way more complicated than it needs to be. And then it can make us feel like, get into this act of judging ourselves if our mind does happen to be very active.
Totally. I mean, I think that that's the irony of not just manifesting stuff, but just like I would say like a lot of Eastern meditation stuff, and I don't know, maybe spirituality in general. The truth of the matter, I think, is that we can't help but be present. And so by trying too hard to be present, we're superimposing something over what's already there. And it's not really necessary. It's like we're trying to manipulate something to get something, in this case, to become present, when it doesn't need to be manipulated because it already is present.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's a key principle for me. I don't even know if it has to do necessarily that much with the law of attraction, but just a key principle in general. I this about me, I think I already Kate, but I don't really like it when people talk about being present so much, in the sense of like forcing it or something, because it's like, well, you already are. So like, yeah, we want to be present to feel better, right? Because it feels good if we are present, generally speaking. If we use that term, right? If we feel like we're in the moment and satisfied in the moment, that feels good. But to say that you're doing something wrong because you're not present is impossible, because you always are present.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we kind of jumped right off the deep end here. So here's a question. How do you maintain the state of living from the end state when you feel the limiting beliefs and fears creeping in? What strategies do you use to help? I could answer that a number of ways. You know, this is really in regards at least to like the manifesting stuff we talk about. This is almost all my videos are just about that. Like the video I did yesterday regarding that question about, you know, being in a situation like a job that the person didn't want to be in, and like how to navigate that and feel like what you want is still going to come in the middle of being in something you do not want to be in. You know, I gave a lot of practical examples of how to navigate that yesterday. But I mean, honestly, if you want to get into more detail about specific strategies, we can talk about that there, but talk about that here. But I don't really even know where to start because all my stuff is just about different ways of doing that. I will say, I don't usually use that term. I don't use a lot of law of assumption terms anymore, period, because of how they're used in the community. I don't think that they actually fit what Neville was trying to say. But end state, I don't try to live from the end. Kind of what I do try to do is access that peace and fulfillment that we just did access in the present moment, and feel that as often as I can. And limiting beliefs and fears are going to come up. And, you know, we can call that resistance or whatever we want, but it's really all about just working with that and working through that. And there's 1,000 different ways to do that. And I don't mean to give you a general answer. It's just I've given many, many specific answers of how to do it. So I don't want to like limit you by saying that. I would say if you want to read The Joy of Not Thinking, which is a guide I did back in 2019, I give some of my favorite ways of doing it personally. And The Law of Attraction Simplified, that book I wrote back in 2021, is all about how we all want to feel good. The law of attraction is, or law of assumption, whatever you want to call it, is all about feeling fulfilled and feeling good. And it's all about embracing the fact that we often do not feel good and working with it so you can still get more of what you want in your life and feel good more often. Also, my seminar playlist, there's a free seminar playlist on my YouTube channel that talks a lot about specific strategies to help us deal with limiting beliefs and fears creeping in. End state, I don't like that term because it seems very limiting to me. Like the end, like I just, like when I feel really good, when I feel really at peace at the moment, in the moment, like for me, that's the end state. It's always the same. It comes back to the sense of relief, the sense of peace in the moment, satisfaction in the moment. And that is separate. If I get present enough, that's separate actually from like what's seemingly happening in my 3D, as people like to say a lot of the time. Like I can be deeply fulfilled and be in the end state for something, and it doesn't feel necessarily like spectacular. It just feels like normal and it feels good. That's like, so I'm always trying to get back there, but like Kate and I were just talking about, I'm already there. You're already there when you're present. So I don't know if that made sense, but specific strategies where I do make much more sense are available in my books and on that playlist where I discuss, you know, different ways of just utilizing this stuff. But yeah, don't worry about it is my is my short answer. Just do it, and because different stuff works at different times. And as soon as I hear end state, I start worrying like I'm doing something wrong personally. So I don't worry about the end state anymore because the end state's right now. Like it's over. You know, that's what Neville meant in my opinion. So letting go of the ego and returning to the truth. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And whatever the truth means to you, again, it's hard to verbalize. Everything is perfect all the time. The golden key, for instance, of Emmett Fox is saying that, like, basically let go and let God, stop thinking of your problems and recognize God, which is that everything is perfect. So that's a very effective way of utilizing this stuff in our life. And Kate, I know you said, I think it's kind of like being present, trying to live in the end or get these processes, principles just right, adds an unnecessary layer of complication. It's exactly right, in my opinion. Like, we hear about these theories and these processes and these different ways of applying this stuff, and it just confuses us, because honestly, it's confusing already. If it was easy, as a lot of people make it seem, everybody would do it, because people aren't stupid. At the end of the day, people are not dumb. Like, when it comes to making their life better, there's a lot of people who are very smart who would embrace these ideas much more if it was as simple as just following a process, and then it works. It's a lot more subtle and nuanced for most of us most of the time, and you got to find out what works for you in the moment, and also just day to day. There's things that used to work for you that might not work for you now, and there's things that you maybe used to think were stupid or dumb manifesting techniques that now work wonderfully for you. For instance, like, you might have been someone who always frowned at journaling or something like that, and now you love to journal and it really helps you, or vice versa. It might have been that you used to be able to journal to get your feelings out and become present, and now when you journal, it doesn't do anything for you. So you gotta work with yourself, and that's why it's so helpful to ground ourselves when we feel overwhelmed and feel stressed, to just realize, okay, I'm still here right now. I still actually am present. I don't feel great, but I'm still present. And the more that we can recognize that presentness instead of not feeling great, the better we will start to feel, like, right away. And to give you specific techniques, I know I'm rambling here, but to give you specific techniques to do that really quickly, I personally would physically move or talk out loud, because that does it quickly for me. Physically moving, being playful, speaking out loud quickly gets me back to that state of feeling better, feeling good. The end state, you could say, I would just say feeling present and at peace, feeling okay in a good way right now. So thank you for that question. I noticed that being tired can really bring in some negative emotions. That was a comment, and that's certainly true. Absolutely. I mean, being tired, so many things can make us reactive. For a lot of us, if we get overtired, we become more reactive. For some of us, when we're hungry, we become really reactive. For some of us, when a family member, somebody we know well, says something that doesn't set off anybody else in the room, but it irritates us, and we become reactive for a reason that we can't really understand right away. So there's all these different ways we get set off, and that's okay. It's about becoming more aware of that and then working with that. And that, again, is like in my opinion, a lifelong process. This is why it's not about a technique. It's about being aware of what's going on more, and becoming more comfortable in your own skin, and just kind of navigating how you're feeling, and seeing what sets you off, and being like, you know what, that's okay. I wonder why that is, like, can I maybe react differently next time? Or like, maybe I can look at this and, why is it that, like, when my friend says something, it bothers me so much? Doesn't seem to bother anybody else in the same way. What is it? What is that? And being tired is the same way. It's like, why when I get tired, am I so triggered? Because there are some people who can be very tired, very overtired, and they aren't emotionally triggered. So it's not across the board, you see? It's very interesting. I mean, that's the thing. And then there's people like Coué, who says we never should be tired, if you want to take it to that point, which in my experience is a difficult thing to master. But so much of our tiredness and fatigue, I will say, can be imaginative. Now, I'm not saying not to get proper sleep and to rest and to relax. I'm all about that. But, I was recently talking about that Coué quote. I've spoken about it several times, about how we graft on a malady to something that is bothering us. So we're very physically tired. Our body would prefer to sleep. And that makes us not feel as good. We're not quite as sharp. But then we start thinking constantly, imagining, oh, I'm so tired. This is tough. I'm tired. And it makes it 10 times worse. So if we become more aware of that, we can stop imagining that as much, and it stops being 10 times worse. We're still tired. We still want to sleep. But instead of it being like a gigantic melodrama, it's just we're tired and we're dealing with it and we prefer to sleep, but we're going to be able to get through and do what we have to do next. Coué always said, and this helped me this morning at 4:50 a.m. when my 1-year-old got up, think to yourself, I can do it. I can do it right now. I can do it right now. This is going to be easy. I can do it. And then even if it's not easy, you think you can do it. And then once you start moving, that tiredness can fade away a little bit, and you're able to do what you need to do. So, that's just another example of why Coué is a really interesting teacher when it comes to using our imagination practically for things like tiredness or other day-to-day things that bother us in a mundane but serious way. Coué maybe didn't have kids. Yeah, I feel the same way. That's a great comment. I know. Yes. Very good point. But yeah, Coué is an interesting example of that. There are other people like that too, that they just seem, Coué would work 16, 20 hours, 6-7 days a week for years. So, and that can also be maybe biology, physiological. The point that Coué is making that's valuable, I think, for most people on this call is that the imagination is playing an effect on your tiredness, and probably more so than it needs to be. So that's what I try to remember. I've got young kids, and I get tired a lot. And I'm active a lot. So it's just, Coué's helped me do the next thing I need to do. He's been very helpful for me in that regard. All right. So I got lost in the chat here. Got a lot of comments here. I've been affirming, and it's become a constant background loop, but haven't seen movement. Being anxious and have some OCD. Robotic affirmations work for me. I visualize too. Is it possible that my affirmations are not targeted at changing the belief that's keeping me stuck? I'm so happy in my job now. My boss is kind and supportive and supports me. Maybe I should be doing the latter, but I'm doing the former, and now it's become a loop groove, and the doubt limiting belief about my boss is so strict is not being changed. So is it possible to recommend to change or add to your affirmation diet after almost 2 months of affirming? Absolutely. I think especially if we're doing a lot of affirming, robotic affirmations, we can label that, we'll give that a general definition here, meaning that not Coué or Joseph Murphy type of affirmations, which tend to be shorter. Coué would have you just affirm for, generally speaking, the general formula is a couple minutes in the morning, a couple of minutes in the evening, and when you need it during the day. At other times, he said, just affirm something as much as needed. But the idea was you didn't have to be affirming all the time, every day. Murphy, likewise, or Neville, and teachers like them, like Catherine Ponder, for instance, she's another great teacher of affirmations and how to utilize them. They would generally have you affirm for shorter periods of time, with the idea being that you feel something good by doing it, right? Feeling is the secret. Robotic affirmations are a little bit different, where ideally we do feel something, obviously, right? But the point is, why they can be effective and be a very effective tool when seemingly little else is they do something because they kind of, as you said, create a groove or a loop in our head where we start thinking the thought more and more. And so we don't necessarily have to feel that good. Ideally, we do. I want to emphasize, ideally, we do feel good while we're doing them. But if we're having trouble feeling good in the situation, in general, a way to start getting the groove in there and feel a little bit better is by doing them often. So you do them more often than these affirmations we hear like Coué talking about, or Neville, or Catherine Ponder, or Joseph Murphy talking about. Long story short here, I would still change them after a few days if you don't feel anything while you're doing them. If you have an affirmation and you feel good saying it robotically, and then it gets boring, or you begin to doubt it, that's obviously going to sometimes happen when you're doing a robotic affirmation, because you're saying it for at least a half an hour a day, maybe a couple hours a day. So it's like a groove, right? It gets boring. You're not even thinking about it. All these different emotions are coming through. But if you find that like you just aren't believing it, shift it, change it. Change it after a couple of days. Be flexible. I'm just reading specifically what you're affirming here. My affirmation, is it possible that my affirmations are not targeted at changing the belief that's keeping me stuck? Like, I'm so happy in my job now versus my boss is kind and supportive and supports me. Maybe I should be doing the latter, but I'm doing the former, and it's become a loop. And because of that, the groove is still there, but I still have that right after I say something like, I'm so happy in my job now, the thought often comes up, my boss is so strict, I'm not happy. Yeah, you got to change it then. That's the short answer. I mean, you want to create as little friction as possible with what you're affirming, whether it's robotic or unrobotic. And unrobotic is better in the sense that you're not going to have to do it as much or think about it as much. Literally, not think about it as much. Robotic affirming is like you're thinking about it by saying it constantly. If you're doing something like what Murphy talks about, or Neville, or Ponder, there's a great well of emotion coming up, hopefully, that's helping you. So you don't want to doubt what's really occurring here. If we look at it from like Coué's theory about how this works, is you're affirming something like, I'm so happy in my job now. Okay, that's one thought. And you're saying that constantly. So the thought is, I'm so happy in my job now. Then the next thought, though, is my boss is so strict. So it's counteracting that. So they're fighting against each other. And it sounds like they've been fighting against each other for a month or two, or what have you, almost 2 months of affirming. You don't want that fighting. You want it so it's as easy for that positive affirmation to get through with as little friction as possible. You want it to be like, you keep on saying, you're saying it, and the conscious mind doesn't fight against it that much, because then it's easier for what you're saying over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to kind of overpower the conscious doubt you have, and for it to sink into the subconscious. If you say something outlandish or unbelievable, if you say, I'm a millionaire and right now you're broke, the friction is tremendous, at least for most people, unless they already were financially rich and like went bankrupt and now feel like they can easily become a millionaire again. But generally speaking, the friction is ridiculous. If you say something like, I know I'm going to get out of this and I'm financially improving every day, or, I'm getting wealthier and wealthier every day in every way, or simply say wealth, 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 or something like that. You get the drift. You can say anything. When you say wealth over and over again, or I'm going to figure this out, I'm getting wealthier each day, there's much less friction than I'm a millionaire. There's very little friction that the conscious mind's still going to throw you stuff saying this is stupid, whatever, but it's not going to be as much as like an outlandish statement where the conscious mind's just like, are you kidding me? You're an idiot. Your conscious mind still might be like, you're an idiot, but it's not going to say it as often if you're just saying wealth over and over again. For like a job, it's like, my job's somehow going to improve, or my job is getting better and I'm going to be in a much better situation soon, is probably going to have less friction than I'm so happy in my job right now when you're not. So work with the affirmation and don't be afraid to change it. Don't be afraid to change it. You don't have to change it every day. And I wouldn't recommend, if you're doing robotic affirmations, necessarily change it every day. But after 3 or 4 days, if it's like feels stale and you're fighting against it, just change it always, because it's the same theme. You want the same thing. Honestly, you could change it every day. The groove, this is worth touching upon. You're doing this affirmation that seems somewhat outlandish to you. For instance, I'm so happy in my job right now, and you're not. And it's become a loop groove. So listen, don't stop letting it be a loop groove. You created a loop groove. You can stop it being a loop groove. Everything's a loop groove. And again, this is why, like, when I have a statement or like some kind of focus that I want to change, it's something, an affirmation, and I'm making no headway, why I immediately, when I have the time, I'm going to talk out loud about it instead, because it's going to give me a lot more power over that doubt. So I'm so happy in my job right now. If I just say that as an affirmation robotically, I don't have a lot of power behind it, and my boss is so strict, comes up really quickly. But if I'm talking out loud, like, I'm so happy in my job, or I'm going to be happier in my job, the thought in my head, my boss is so strict, is still there. But then I'm talking out loud to that. I'm like, well, why do you think your boss is so strict? Why is this going on? How can I fix this? I know he's strict, but I'm still going to feel better in my job. I'm determined to. I'm talking out loud. And by talking out loud, the conscious voice in my head doesn't have as much power. And if I want, I can have a civil conversation with it. I don't have to get angry at it. I can be like, yes, I can talk. I can be like, well, I know he's strict, but I'm still good. This job is still going to work out, or I'm going to find a new job. What do you want me to do here? You can talk to it like that too, or you can talk to it angrily or lovingly or whatever. Out loud, talking out loud instead of affirmations, or alongside affirmations, makes the friction less. So we're looking for frictionless affirmations. Neville type affirmations, like, isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? Going to sleep in the wish fulfilled, where like you aren't visualizing, but you're just affirming, isn't it wonderful, or something like that, right? They work so well. And so same with the Murphy ones, like, it's like, this idea of like, it's over, it's done, because they're frictionless. When you feel it you feel it, that you're like, it's done. Oh my God, isn't it wonderful? It's frictionless in that moment. Then you wake up and maybe you don't feel that good. In that case, you've got to do it the next night and keep on going, blah, blah, blah. It's a different thing. You want to be able to get behind it as much as you can, is what it comes down to, and make it as frictionless as possible. Again, why we go back to something like every day in every way, I'm getting better and better, because it's a general formula that's pretty frictionless, something like that. A lot of like the Florence Scovel Shinn or Catherine Ponder affirmations are pretty frictionless. But it's not about exactly what they're saying. It's finding what's frictionless or has the least friction for you, the least resistance. So I hope that made some sense. And we can do a follow-up, if you have a follow-up question in regards to that answer. Kate, you said, yeah, I go through periods where I have trouble sleeping. This is one of them. And while I haven't entirely resolved it, my resistance makes it much worse. Whereas when I surrender, I deal with the situation much better. Yes, yeah, totally. I've gone through that before. My sleep schedule was often off because of my kids. And again, Kuei taught this to me, like, 5 years ago. And he talks all about this. When you resist, when you try to go back to sleep, you can't go back to sleep easily. When you give in to being awake, it's easier to fall back to sleep. All right, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting these. Sorry for asking so many questions. No, it was a good question. It had multiple parts for a reason. I just played the actual cards. Okay. Thank you so much for a detailed reply. Is it okay if I keep the original loop but create a new thought loop at some other time of day? I'm so happy at my job now. My boss is kind and supportive. Night loop. Again, whatever makes you feel best. If you're doing these affirmations where you're affirming a lot, I'm assuming 20, 30, 40 minutes at a time or longer, it's about the feeling. If you could do an affirmation for 3 minutes and you feel good about it, I'm so happy at my job, and you feel that, you affirm that for 3 minutes and you feel it, That's better than an hour of a robotic affirmation where you don't feel anything. That's better. We do hear stories, and I believe it, of, sometimes like people robotically affirm something and they don't believe it. Kate, you were on that call when we talked about belief, right? And how it, like, sometimes weird stuff happens where you don't believe it consciously still. You're like, this is not going to happen. And you've been trying to manifest something, maybe you've been affirming it for it robotically, or just affirming in whatever way you were for months, and you basically give up, or you're just like, this isn't going to happen. And then it happens, right? Those kind of manifestations happen. And like, I know if you go on like Sammy Ingram's channel, she's got plenty of robotic affirmation success stories where that has happened. Nonetheless, that's a small percentage of people who have success with robotic affirmations. The vast majority of people who have success with robotic affirmations is because they start to believe more and more by saying and thinking the thing over and over and over and over again. Belief is a weird thing. And sometimes you don't consciously believe and it still happens. But most of the time, you want to believe if you can. And so you want to be able to get behind it in some way. That's how you get the feeling. That's how you get the conviction it's going to actually happen, and this degree of certainty, and this idea of it already has happened inwardly, it's going to manifest externally. And again, it's easier said than done a lot of the time. For a big thing, like we were talking about yesterday, like if you're in a job you dislike and you actively dislike it and you want to get out of it into a much better job, and you're at that job 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's when active affirming can be really helpful. For instance, at your job, when you're having all these thoughts about how much you hate it, just to say like, I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. I'm going to get out of this. This is going to get better. This is going to get better. This is going to get better. Because even though that affirmation isn't like making you feel tremendous by any means necessarily, it's neutralizing all that negativity. Or again, I would take my bathroom break and or go to my car and start talking out loud vigorously to myself about how I'm going to get out of this, or how this is going to change. You guys get this. I mean, it's flexible. Affirmations can shift. Don't get obsessed about the actual affirmation. Get obsessed about how you feel and how you're looking at the situation. It's like, you can ask yourself at the end of each day, or anytime during the day, but let's say at the end of each day, how did I feel about my job today, or my job prospects going forward? Like, how do I feel about it? How do I actually feel? If you feel pretty good about it, you're on the right, you're doing good. If you feel bad, you got to change things up. That could go for like a relationship. Like, I manifested about I affirmed about my SP, or being in a relationship. How do I actually feel about my love life today? How do I actually feel? Or finances. Like, how do I actually feel about my financial life? How do I feel about money right now? Or my health? Like, how do I actually feel about my health? Here I am saying I'm in perfect health, or getting better and better. How do I actually feel about my health? And if the answer is not what you want to think about maybe why it's not what you want, and you want to consider, if you are doing the affirmation thing, changing your affirmation. I always felt hesitant talking out loud because it felt silly, but I did it for a bit this morning, and I really did feel better. It also helped dissolve some of my overthinking obsessive tendencies. Yeah, exactly. I mean, talking out loud, just like moving around or doing something playful, it's against societal norms. So there's going to be that reticence to do it. But if you get past that, it's a very helpful exercise. And you can take it to extremes. My Stop Being Serious videos, which are free, stopbeingserious.com. I go over extreme ways of utilizing that to feel better.
Yeah, and I just wanted to speak to the thing about the affirmations, because that's something that I kind of struggled with for a long time too. Is when I learned about the robotic affirming, that became like a process in itself, where I felt like I had to choose the right affirmations, and I was always kind of second guessing myself. And because I'm tend to kind of be prone to like like kind of obsessive or overthinking tendencies anyway. So this kind of just fueled it. And so when I stepped away from it and kind of told myself, it doesn't really matter, what I say, as long as it's kind of along the general theme that it feels empowering, it feels good, and just kind of saying, more, I guess, general statements like, why am I so lucky? Isn't it amazing? Just kind of things like everything's always working out for me. And just kind of allowing it to arise organically from me, as opposing to feeling like I had to force it. Because I just got into the state where every time I would be, I don't know, like doing chores or whatever, I'd be like, okay, I better get on the affirmations.
Yes. So common, Kate. So exactly. I'm really glad you mentioned that. That's the thing. It's like, this is the dirty underbelly. Didn't we do a workshop about, or a session last month or 2 months ago where we were talking about, like, it's crazy. I mean, I do this too. Cause I fall prone to overthinking, like a lot of us, that's why I wrote The Joy of Not Thinking. Affirmations, especially robotic stuff, it doesn't work well for a lot of people. Like for me, it works well in desperate situations or when I'm relaxed. But like when I'm just like, if I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to manifest something through robotic affirmations, it works terribly for exactly the reasons you just talked about. Like, because I'm like, oh, I've got 5 minutes, I'm doing the dishes, I should be affirming right now. And it's like, again, superimposing something that's already there. Like your subconscious, God or whatever, already knows what you want. You don't constantly have to be saying it. And it doesn't matter how you word it a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. It's a tool. It's a cool technique. Again, I mean, if you're watching this on the replay and you didn't watch, I think it was the last group session. We went over robotic affirmations in detail, like saying the same thing, what Kate just talked about too. Like, you want to be flexible and just see what comes up and what works for you, because it's like, it's not always, this is important. I mean, it's not as straightforward as it's made to seem for a lot of people. Not to say it's not straightforward for everybody. There are some people that it's their technique. It works great for them. That's awesome. But there's a reason. Actually, Kate Howells is on this call. I know Kate Howells mentioned a book to me a few weeks ago, or the Dorothea Brand book. Maybe she'll write in the chat what that is or chime in here. Where
was it Wake Up and Live?
Wake Up and Live.
Wake Up and Live.
Yes. We were talking about how in that book, Brand says, and we've discussed this on my channel before, like why QA is not as well known and popular today as you would think. And this was back in like the 1930s, even. The QA movement, the auto-suggestion movement, had already largely faded by the 1930s. Today, he's like forgotten about pretty much. And the reason is, I think for, Kate Finley, what you said about it becoming something that it's not, like where you're trying, people obsessed over saying something repetitively, wrote affirmations, and it totally missed the point, the point of how you're using your imagination freely. And that's what's controlling everything. And for like intelligent people who have been successful in many things in life, like Brand has that great, she says, I'm paraphrasing her, she says something like, she's like, you end up feeling like you're an idiot, like saying this thing over and over and over again. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, yeah, that's what you have to worry about. And that's like, that's what robotic affirming you have to worry about too. It's like, if it was as simple as just saying something over and over again, you're going to get what you want. If it was as simple as that, everybody on this call, guys, do you really think we wouldn't have already figured this out yet? In the thousands and thousands of years of human history here, of like, you just say something over and over again and then you get it? You think this is like, it's not that simple for most people. It engenders a belief, and generally speaking, it engenders a belief. Even if you don't believe it, it does something to your subconscious if you say it enough, where it then changes your reality. So there's without question something to it, but there is definitely the possibility it's going to make you feel obsessive and like a fool. And thank you, Kate, for sharing that Dorothea Brand thing with me, because that was really interesting. I was thinking about doing a video about it.
I was just thinking, was it okay to interrupt?
Yeah. We're just rambling.
About the affirmations, which I use a fair amount of, what I've noticed lately with them is talking to myself is helping. So like the thing about the boss who's strict, I was affirming something, not around a strict boss, but around a relationship recently. And I was saying I wanted it to be different and it was all going to be positive and all the rest of it. And then I said to myself, can I let go of the fear I feel around it? And I just said to myself, no, I can't. I'm too scared to let go of the fear. That's okay. Now I know what I'm dealing with. I now know that I'm scared in this relationship. And now that I know that I'm scared, I don't feel so scared. I can handle this. And I'm thinking about the boss. If I was trying to affirm I felt good at work, but I had a strict boss, I think for me, with my own history, it would be the recognition, why am I bothered by him being strict or her being strict? I'm bothered by the strictness because I feel fear like I'm going to be told off. That's what I used to feel when I was a child. I'm scared of my boss. How can I feel relaxed in this job if I'm scared? What's the bottom line here? He'll sack me. So what? Okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. So now I'm going to affirm, I feel great in my job. Worst case scenario, he could sack me. I'm okay with that. That's fine. I'm okay with my job. I love my job. I love my job. I'm okay with it. And I know now I've identified what the problem is with the strict boss. It's my fear because he's going to sack me. He's going to catch me out. He's going to see me doing a bad thing and I'll be out of there, which actually doesn't really matter that much because it's actually quite unlikely that if he catches me doing something slightly wrong, I'll be out on the first chime. Probably be a couple of warnings before I go. And I'm not that badly behaved realistically, but the fear is from childhood when I would have got really told off.
I love that. See, that's a much more, thank you for that, Kate. That's a much more dynamic usage of affirmations, where like you're using affirmations, but you're also talking out loud to yourself. You're pausing, you're reflecting, and then you're changing your tact of what you're saying to yourself based upon what you reflected upon. Entirely different than just saying something over and 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 over again. Not to say that there's no power in that, but like, you know, Kate's a therapist. I mean, you just saw what therapy, you know, complementing these ideas can do. It's like a different, there's a lot more power there perhaps, you know, because it's like, we're not just trying to do a technique. We're trying to look at ourselves and where is this fear coming from, or this shame or this doubt, and work with it. And we can work with it in fun ways like that. Like, you know, oh, maybe I did get fired. Well, that could be a good thing. You know, it's not my fault. Maybe that's the best thing that could happen. But if I'm talking out loud like this, like loosey-goosey, actually thinking, oh, it could be fun to be fired, that's very different than being like, I love my job. I love my job. I love my job. It's just it's a different vibe, right? It's like you don't feel that looseness, that sense of it's going to be okay. It's going to work out for the best. That was great. Thank you. Thank you, both Kates, for that great information, great insights. All right. I'm going to just go back here. As a lot of you know, I'm not the best with the chats. Lester Lev, so this is just a comment. Oh, sorry. All right, here we go. I'll follow up on all this stuff if I can. If I miss something on this call, just email me at info@radicalcounselor.com and I'll answer it. So this is a follow-up. This is the same person who was asking about this job situation affirmation. In imaginal scenes or affirmation sessions, I feel good or at least stable. Excellent. Afterwards, with reality being opposite, the belief sinks. How do we prevent that? This circles back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, that's the work. That's the video I did yesterday, or like, the example Kate House just gave, where it's like, you start looking at why the belief sinks. Why do I feel this way? And perhaps you talk out loud, or you journal, or you do something, asking yourself why, and like, a lot of the time it's like, well, we've got to look at what arises, why the belief often sinks because we get fearful, scared, or ashamed, or something like that. So we look at that fear or shame, we feel it, perhaps we ask it why it's here, what we could do to help it, how can we understand it better. These are just examples, but it's like, what's that saying? It's famous. I heard it in a network marketing thing. It's like, to get to the treasure land, first you have to go through the trash dump. That's what this is about, folks. Unsexy manifesting. It's not always, sometimes it's easy and smooth. I don't know if most people on this call have probably had easy, smooth manifestations, but you get into this stuff long enough and you want to address these major life issues, working with them, it's not always going to be easy and smooth, probably. I mean, I hope you're the 1%, or not 1%, 0.1%, where that's not the case and everything just becomes easy and smooth. 0.1% is generous, probably 0.001%. But shit's going to come up. You're going to have to go through the garbage dump. It's okay. The clues are in the garbage dump. The answers are in the garbage dump a lot of the time, in the feelings, in that sinking feeling. This is all right. This is a comment. This is a good segue. Lester Levinson. He might have been the 0.01%. Lester Levinson claimed that when he became awakened and understood that the worldly existence is just an illusion, he could live without sleep. Yeah, that's funny. I was thinking that when I mentioned Kuwait, Lester was somebody else I was thinking of. He said we didn't need to sleep. He said that we need sleep mostly because we make ourselves tired through unnecessarily striving to manually create reality instead of mentally allowing reality. Love that. That's pretty far out. I'm going to read that again. Lester said we need sleep mostly because we make ourselves tired through unnecessarily striving to manually create reality instead of mentally allowing reality. Let that sit for a moment. It's pretty deep. I know Lester also said, like, we are limitless beings superimposing limitation on ourselves. And you said that's what makes us tired, basically. That's what makes us suffer. We're infinite. You hear that all the time in LOA. And I mean, that term means whatever, but it's appropriate here. We're infinite. We have infinite power. God, your imagination is this infinitely abundant thing. And we superimpose limits on ourselves. And maybe you could say, if you want to get more pragmatic, practical, scientific, that the body does have limits. I mean, Kuei said the body has limits, for instance, right? But we graft on limits on top of those limits. So, Kuei said, you should never really get tired. You should be able to, hardly sleep. Lester said you don't need to sleep at all. These are extreme situations or examples, but they're pointing at something interesting. I know W. Clement Stone's another one of these people. He slept 3-4 hours a night and he lived to be 100. So, and again, all about the imagination and like letting all three of those men, not to be critical of genders, but men tend to be more, make more big claims of this stuff, it seems like, than women do. All those three guys, they all basically said, like, your imagination is in control. And if you let it go, if you align with it, if you become limitless with it, your life is going to become much easier, and you're going to lose that fatigue you have, generally speaking. You're going to lose that tiredness you have. So it's interesting. Thank you for mentioning Lester. I was going to mention him with Kue, but I thought that was a little bit too far out. But what the hell, we went there. He's always an interesting place to go to. Comment, I like to scrap and rewrite my affirmations after a while. Absolutely. And listen, I think we spoke about this when we had that affirmations free group session. I have this problem too. You know, I have like a list of statements, affirmations, whatever you want to call them, a short list that I look at every day, might say before bed. I generally still do say something like every day in every way, I am, or we are getting better and better. But I have a few other things I might say. I'm still, after years of doing this stuff and always telling people to be flexible with it, I still have a tendency to be more inflexible than I would like about it. There's statements that sometimes I'm like, oh, I should change that. Oh, I still want to focus on this. And I let it be there for a week or two, and it should have been gone after 2 days. So everybody, not everybody, but it's a tendency. Don't worry about it. Just know you can scrap it. It's not a big deal. It's not what it's about. The phrasing, the words don't matter. It's what it's pointing to. And like your deeper self, your limitless, infinite self, it already knows. You've got this guidance system there that exactly, you know, to paraphrase this Lester again, you know, that we become tired because we're not using the guidance system. We're unnecessarily striving to manually create something through an affirmation, for instance, instead of allowing it to be there, letting it flow through us and flow into us and become us. Mention it again. Lester's autobiography, No Attachments, No Aversions, is a great book if people want to read more Lester. Robotic affirmations keep negative thoughts out. Yes, that's the point. That's one of the great things about robotic affirmations. Robotic affirmations can make it so a situation that you don't like, instead of being like a 10 on the stress scale, becomes a 3. You know, like you hear something you don't like, or you're at a job you don't like, instead of getting overwhelmed and pissed off, you're like, I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now, or I'm calm, or, you know, this is working fine. So you stay at like a 3 or 4 or 5, as opposed to going up to a 10 in terms of stress. That's huge. That's a freaking great tool. If it just did that in and of itself, it would be great, but it does more than that, you know. But, you know, negative thoughts out of your head is great. Kate Finley said, always stepping into my awareness center has been very powerful, reminding myself that even in states of inner turmoil, I'm the one who's having these thoughts and emotions, and therefore they truly don't have any power over me unless I allow them to. I don't have to be a prisoner in my own mind. Yeah, I mean, of course, easier said than done, I would say, Kate, right? I mean, I know from like, that's the whole thing, but of course, that's the thing. Whenever we become aware, and again, this circles back to the present moment thing. Like when people say, I create my reality, and what that means for me personally is like, it means like I create that, like what, you know, the thoughts I'm having, the emotions I'm having, I'm the one creating them. That's like what I have a level of control or direction over. The other stuff, I don't know. Maybe I have some control over it. Maybe I don't. But like when I feel bad or feel like overwhelmed, if I'm able to step back even just a little bit, by talking out loud, by moving, by listening to music, or whatever it is, if I'm able to step back just a little bit, I realize, like, you know what? I created this. Or at least I created a significant majority of what's going on right now in my head in terms of my emotions. I created it. I bought into it. And that's why it's happening. And I don't do that judgmentally, usually, at least, or I try my best not to be judgmental about it. But I'm like, this is me. My reaction is something that I created. I learned this. And maybe I learned it when I was really young. And you know, I can modify it and try to change it. But I created it. It's okay. And when I step back, I'm still present. I'm still here. I'm okay. And when you do that, when you're in a difficult situation, that might just, again, if your stress level's up at a 10 or whatever, you're really overwhelmed, that might get you just down to a 5. But that's a big deal. And again, that's what active affirming can do too. It can get you down. And then if you take that responsibility that you created it, things inevitably calm down internally after a while, whether it takes a few hours, a few days, or a few weeks. And it can take a few weeks. That's okay. Or a few months, even if it's a very traumatic situation, like a death or an illness or something like that. When it calms down more, I can work with it more openly. But you can be in damage control. Like, that's okay. Again, that's a good way to use all these tools to get down from like, I'm freaking out and I feel like I'm gonna have a panic attack at like a 9 or 10 down to a 5, where it's like, I can deal with this, or a 3. I find, generally speaking, if you use these tools and become more self-aware and become more cognizant that you are creating your reactions and, you know, how you're feeling, at least in large part, it's you doing it to yourself. You're able to get down, to calm yourself down relatively quickly. It usually does not take weeks. You know, you still might not feel great for a couple of days, but like you're okay. You're like, I feel like crap, but I'm okay. Through the trash dump we go. I mean, again, this is what's interests me about these ideas, generally speaking, is this is what we can work on. This is what we can work with each other on. This is the point of like a group call like this, or individual coaching, because like we talk about what's actually going on. And again, maybe this doesn't happen to everybody, but I'm very skeptical when I hear these stories about people manifesting stuff using techniques and everything just comes their way and it always works for them. It's like, show me more tangible proof of that then. These are practical tools to help us improve our lives and hopefully improve the lives of others. But that means dealing with these emotions and feelings and belief systems that have been there with us for a long, long time. And that's great. It's great. Okay, you said, yeah, I recognize that many of my desires are trying to fill a void within myself. It's really solely about the desire in and of itself. That's always it. Again, when we feel really satisfied, in my experiences, we feel really satisfied, you've got it. You've got it. And when you feel calm, and again, when you're really stressed out, it can be hard to do this, but when you get to a place where you feel calm and you're not even maybe thinking that hard, or usually I would say maybe you're not thinking that hard about like trying to get anything. You're just kind of there. Maybe you're just sitting down, relaxing, or taking a nice walk, or taking a swim, or just doing something, you know, that you enjoy doing, but don't think that much about. You realize like, holy cow, like this is it. There's a great bumper sticker. I think it's like, I'd rather be here now. You know, it's that. This is what you want. When you get there, this is what you want. It's like, I don't want anything else. You know, like my 1-year-old, like, you know, this afternoon, she was like crawling over me and like whacking my face. And like, I felt, you know, I was lying on my back. I was like, this is what I want. But it wasn't in a dramatic way. It wasn't like, oh my God, I've manifested this, you know, this baby that gets up at 4:50 a.m. No, it's like, it's like, you know, this is, I'm present. And the irony, again, circling back to the first thing we said, the irony is we're always present. It's always here. What we want is always here. Not in this, like, there's infinite possibilities. I don't know anything about the infinite possibilities. I know that if you get still enough internally, you can be active externally while you're doing it. But when you get still and are not thinking hard about something, when you just kind of are, you're happy with what you are. You're to, you know, paraphrase Lester, you're not limiting yourself anymore. You become limitless. You realize you're fine already. Comment, yeah, it's when it's a major life issues and the stakes are high, then it's hard to keep the faith. Generally speaking, and again, that's why we do the work. Exactly, and that's exactly right. Again, this isn't like I want to manifest a cup of coffee. Cool. Go to a YouTube channel where they teach you how to do that. You know what I mean? Like, this is like when this is about going through the garbage dump and keeping your faith. This is the follow-up question from the person who was talking about the job. What if nothing is working and you just pray, let it all out in front of God, ask for help, cry, and you feel better afterwards for a bit, then no movement makes you doubt if anything works. But I guess my question is, prayer can be another tool? Of course, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you want advice about that, or not advice, yeah, I mean, I guess you could say advice. Someone who talks about that really, really well is Emily Cady. I would look at the collected works of Emily Cady. Yeah, we talk about Emily Cady a lot on the podcast, but she yeah, I mean, often when we feel like nothing's working, we have to let go, and that often looks like a breakdown. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but if we're unwilling to face those feelings in a workable way, almost like a counseling therapeutic way, and it comes to the point where they just overwhelm us, then we just have to give up, and then something shifts. That's, again, I think, almost physiological. That's something primal there. I feel like we've talked about that before. If you search, there's videos about that. But yeah, Emily Cady is my favorite person who discusses that. For damage control and just generally feeling good, Brad Yates is a godsend. He's got a tapping EFT video for just about every scenario you can imagine. Yeah, tapping is a great tool. We actually don't talk about that much on my channel, but tapping is another thing. So many people love tapping. It's an excellent usage of using your body and using your mind in a way at the same time. So tapping is a great example of a stress reduction tool for damage control. Well said. Yeah, and this is a good point here too. I think most of us come to manifesting because we want to change the outer reality, some circumstances we're in. That's the whole thing. So it's like, that's the irony. And that's why, like, to this day, really, I don't really consider myself a manifesting teacher. Like, for me, it's just about stress reduction and changing how you feel on the inside, and then your external reality will change inevitably. Because these tools are talked about so poorly online, I found myself taking on the role of some kind of a manifesting teacher sometimes, just to try to explain some of the tools. But yeah, I mean, I think that is understandably the thing, because that's how it's promoted, is that you're going to change your external reality. What we usually find when we try to change our external reality and we read these great manifesting teachers is that it's not as easy as we first thought it would be. At least it gets to that point where we run up against a wall, and the initial techniques that seem so appealing that maybe worked at first, the Neville techniques, the Joseph Murphy techniques, the Abraham Hicks techniques, they either stop working or they don't work as well, or you just become doubtful or cynical. And that's where we start. That's what it's all about. I mean, those teachers, those great teachers, like I just mentioned, they all knew that. They were giving examples of external success in many of those occasions to tell you that it's about changing yourself internally too. But without question, I mean, Neville and Abraham Hicks, they do promote external change. So it makes sense, right? Like, they talk so much about that, but all those great teachers are talking about internal work, which inevitably ends up coming back to looking at how we feel and figuring out more, becoming more aware of how we feel, and perhaps, why we feel that way, and how we can shift it, how we can feel better about ourselves. If we feel better about ourselves, our life improves. And sometimes there's a lag time between our life externally improving and feeling better. But the more, I think that this is something I'm learning myself over the years, the more you can accept feeling good, that when you feel good, other things will be added to you. Like Joel Goldsmith always talks about, and all these manifesting teachers do, all the religious ones, like, realize God first and all other things will be added to you. That's a manifesting concept. That's not a spiritual concept, because I know all these other spiritual teachers who don't say that. And they're very, I don't know, they seem very spiritually in tune. And many saints and, quote unquote masters had tragic stuff in their life, or illnesses or injuries or what have you. But a lot of the manifesting perspective, people like Well, I don't even want to lump Neville on this. This is like a Joel Goldsmith type thing that he really articulates a lot. And H. Emily Cady articulates it a lot too. It's just that you recognize God, right? And usually we recognize God and we stop there. But these teachers talking about inner abundance changing to external abundance as well, they just say this, recognize that this internal abundance you recognize, this peace you recognize, is also external abundance if you allow it to be. And then it becomes like a path towards manifesting if you look at it this way. I explained this and explored it a little bit in the last podcast episode I did about John Randolph Price and his book, The Abundance Book. You can listen to that episode. But something I really liked and I've been pondering recently is, we hear God is my supply. We hear that phrase all the time. And, Goldsmith says often, he says, well, if God is your supply, why are there so many people who don't have sustenance and enough money and all this stuff? If God is all our supply, why doesn't everybody have the supply they want? And this is the manifesting tact, I think, is he says it's because they don't recognize it's their supply. So from a manifesting perspective, God is my supply, God is your supply, is recognizing that, that God, your consciousness, my consciousness that God is my supply becomes my supply. In other words, if you convince yourself consciously that if you recognize God is your supply, if you convince yourself that God is your supply, God becomes your supply. Most people on earth obviously have not convinced themselves of that. They don't have the subjective conviction that God is their supply. I think Price said, my consciousness of God as supply is my supply. So that's an interesting way to think about these ideas in this religious language, and God as supply, and why we don't realize God as supply, even though supposedly our consciousness is everything. Sorry, I just went off there. Felt right at the time. Still feels
Which
right.
I suppose is like I imagine it as keeping my feet off the hose pipe.
Yeah.
And trying to hover above it, completely off it. But so obviously it's difficult to stay off it. So I always have this image of practicing trying to hover. And it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is getting pretty far out there.
But I suppose it's faith. Faith is the foot off the hose pipe.
Well, yeah, but it's like it comes back to that. How do you build the faith, right? And it's like,
yeah, and sustain it and keep that perfume. And I suppose all of those affirmations, all of these things are trying to get a whiff of the scent of the perfume that is the faith that needs to be sustained to keep the foot off the hose pipe and keep on hovering above it. But it's very hard. And so there might be the affirmations and then collapse back down onto the hose pipe, splurge, and then doing another method, lifting a bit, collapsing back onto the hose, but loving yourself when you fall back on it. So what? Fell on the hose pipe, blocked the supply, I'll have another go.
Yeah. It's you're always present the whole time, even when you're
even when you're splat on the hose pipe.
Yeah. But I mean, it's people always get on me for saying that this stuff is difficult, and again, that's fine. I just someone like Goldsmith would say, he goes, you're not going to learn this stuff overnight. This isn't manifest what you want in 3 days. I mean, this is a lifelong experience. And when we get to this type of talk, which again, I mean, if you're on this call, you probably like this kind of discussion, but you do not need to get this far out to utilize these ideas. Obviously, I think everybody knows that. But faith is something felt, and it's an experiential process. Again, I would suggest listening to the podcast episode if you're interested in this, that we did on John Randolph Price, because Price, I'm pretty sure, was directly influenced by Goldsmith. It's just, I feel like it's a very good, clear explanation of what Goldsmith always talks about how that fount is there and the water's always coming, but you have to recognize it. It has to become automatic. And the more automatic it becomes, the easier it becomes. But Goldsmith talks about, he goes, sometimes it feels like you're on top of the mountain. The next day you feel like you're in Hades, So it's like, it's still that thing that you're navigating a lot of the time, it can seem like, and it's like, well, how can I be present for it and realize, God is always with me. Even if I'm in the gates of hell, I'm with God. That is my experience, And so if that's your consciousness, my consciousness of God, as supply, in that sense, where God's always with you, even in hell, that is your supply. This is wicked far out, but I mean, that's just, this is when it becomes, you can't try to force that to happen. It just happens. Like when we have realizations or what have you, like about that, it happens gradually. Like, again, like you might be robotically affirming or affirming something, and it's there's just a lot of pain, and you're trying to realize why the pain's there, perhaps, or perhaps you're just trying to affirm through it or whatever. You can do a lot of this stuff without being consciously aware of it. I mean, that's what we did in our own lives before we became aware of these tools, right? But I think most of us on this call have experienced times where, like, you're trying to get something or to fix something or for something to change, and you basically either give up hope or don't know what to do. And then a realization comes that just explains it. And it's like, it comes out of nowhere. We can make a story about why it came afterwards, but the subjective experience is not like that. Like I've had like a lot of like realizations I've had the last couple of years. I don't want to say they're like profound necessarily, like, but they felt profound to me at the time, for sure. Like they happened for, like, I remember a couple I've had like in the car the past couple of years, where like, it's like I've been, thinking, pondering, trying to work something out for maybe weeks or longer, and thinking I figured something out. And then there's a, you go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back, and then you take another 2 steps, and it's very frustrating. And then you just are not doing anything special, and you're driving, and it's like, oh yeah, I understand that now. That's an experience. That's subjective experiencing it. It's very different than hearing some theory about it. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, let me just see if there's anything else. Chat, I think we caught up. I hope I got most of those comments. If, like I said, if not, just let me know, and you can email me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, again, so many interesting, exciting ways to look at these concepts. And there's so many great ways to learn about them and learn about yourself. So I hope people continue to do that. I'm here for coaching and counseling if people want. I'm here to answer questions if people want to ask me short questions. They can email me their questions. But don't limit yourself, because I think almost all of us have a tendency to limit ourselves when it comes to this material and think it has to be a certain way, and it doesn't. Your imagination is expansive, right? So many different options for how to use this stuff. Do what works for you. Do what techniques, what affirmations, or whatever works for you to feel better and more present. and trust in yourself, then the process kind of unfolds for you. Easy, at least in my experience, more easily when we learn to trust ourselves more and more. And you definitely get better at trusting yourself the longer you do this. You just do. You don't listen to Tim, you listen to yourself, and listening to me or whoever can be helpful sometimes, for sure, because it's different opinions, but you know that you are the person who ultimately knows, not some teacher or some theory or whatever. So, yeah. All right. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. I'll post this on YouTube sometime soon. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.